Please welcome back Senior Editor for the Economist Group, Matthew Bishop.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up my panel now to discuss where the opportunities and battlegrounds are in the United States. So I'd like to invite up on stage Ralph Becker, who was a former mayor of Salt Lake City. I'd like to invite up Margaret Hoover, who is president of American Unity Fund, and probably familiar to many of you watching CNN from her many appearances there. And then last but by no means least, Senator Claudia Lopez from Colombia, who's going to bring a broader America into the conversation. So, there's been this tremendous sense of progress in the United States on LGBT issues, but particularly the marriage, gay marriage being sort of finally getting the support of the Supreme Court. And yet, there's this also a sense that everything's still in play and there's an awful lot still to fight for. And so in this panel, we want to sort of review lessons learned to some extent, but also strategies for the remaining battles ahead. And also particularly as this is a business-focused conference, where the business community can play more of a role. Last year, obviously in Indiana and a number of other states, the Salesforce-led move to resist laws that were being put in place was a very significant moment. And Margaret, I wanted to start with you because your whole mission is sort of modernize the Republican Party, which doesn't seem to be working at the moment, if I may say so.
But I'm about to retire.
But what is as you see the choices, the opportunities here, is there any more optimistic scenario you can reveal to us about what's going on in the Republican Party that should make us optimistic that LGBT issues can continue to make progress if your party takes over?
Sure. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I think just by way of background, I'm the president of a group called American Unity Fund, and our entire mission is full freedom and equality for LGBT Americans, and we go about doing that by working exclusively with Republicans. We work with Democrats too, but our focus really is to leverage our relationships on the Republican side of the aisle, and we do that because we're Republicans. And so when we can go into a state like Indiana, and we have been supportive of Mike Pence in the past, and we've been supportive of Republican senators and Republican House members, and we've been building relationships with legislators in that state and lobbyists in that state, we have real credibility with Republicans in that state. And they're willing to listen to us because we walk like them and we talk like them and we think like them. And frankly, we are Republicans. We're not fake Republicans. We're real Republicans. And so they listen to us. And what I will tell you is, the caricature of Republicans is really divorced from the reality of where Republicans are on LGBT issues. I think you see a stereotypical Republican that is not good on these issues, that is more representative of a regional Republican, often from the South, the social conservative element of the conservative movement. But Republicans have led the way in many, many cases on LGBT issues. And I hesitate to mention, and I don't want to politicize this, but Rob Portman was the first Republican senator who came out for the freedom to marry, and he came out for the freedom to marry before 10 US senators who were Democrats, 72 hours before Hillary Clinton came out for the freedom to marry, months before Barack Obama came out for the freedom to marry. And some people say, oh, well, that's because he has a gay son. But the truth is, he has a very tough Senate race right now. And if he doesn't win that Senate race, the reason he will not have run that Senate race when they write the history of that race is because he came out, he made the courageous decision and did the right thing to come out for the freedom to marry. And that was the beginning of his decline in support from Republicans. So he has been a real leader on that, even though within the conservative movement, there are real forces fomenting to unseat him.
Because at the heart of, I guess nationwide, the battle that's going on is this sort of religious groups versus liberal groups and business groups. And business would more line up typically on the pro-LGBT side increasingly, and the religious group against. And I guess within the Republican Party, the business community has been increasing its sway, if anything, over the past few years. So that struggle is, how do you see that playing out in this particular presidential?
aside from the president, the landscape, what you should know about this is that if there is going to be full freedom and equality for LGBT Americans in the next, in our lifetime, it is going to happen because Republicans are on board and Republicans are leading the charge. Because there are 69 legislative chambers in this country that are run by Republicans, many of them by supermajorities, ultramajorities, where there are 3/4 of the seats in the legislatures are held by Republicans. In other words, and by the way, in states across the country from Maine to Florida to Texas, every single day, all of them are in session right now, right? Not all of the legislatures are in session all year, but they're all in session right now, and there are bills every single day that are coming through these legislative chambers that are horrible for LGBT people. I mean, not just sort of bathroom bills and bullying bills and bills that try to undermine the marriage decision, really terrible bills for transgender people. I mean, there was a bill that was killed in South Dakota yesterday that would have taken, as you know, DNA samples, blood tests of transgender students, transgender kids, and stored them in a state database for scientific research. Horrifying stuff. And the people who are killing those bills, that was a Republican governor of South Dakota that vetoed it yesterday, right? But to your point, it is often the business community, not in the student bills, but it is often the business community who is aligned as an ally in this race. That's what, of course, as you reference, happened in Indiana. But it's also not the business community. It's right-thinking Republicans who are sort of tired of the craziness.
And just one more question to you before we move to bring the others in. But I mean, this presidential race, because of Justice Scalia passing away and so forth, has become this much more of a referendum on the Supreme Court and so forth. I mean, to what extent is there any hope that we're going to get a presidential candidate from the Republicans that will take anything other than a hardline anti-LGBT position on this?
Right. Well, and we know very well where Ted Cruz stands, and he's not very well in favor of any sort of LGBT freedoms. There is some hope. It depends on who the candidate is. There is some hope that a John Kasich or a Marco Rubio might moderate, even though they've been very clear that they're not in favor of freedom to marry. They've also been very clear that the time is to move forward and unify the country and sort of respect. And they use respect language. We respect people of different walks of life, and we want to move the country forward. Donald Trump, it's very hard to tell. I mean, Donald Trump has said,
I went almost everything, really.
Yeah, because he says everything on every different day. And and our job, frankly, as American Unity Fund, is one of the things we're working on right now is excising the really negative and, frankly, bigoted things that are in the Republican Party platform in Cleveland at the Republican National Convention. There are 5 places in the platform that have explicitly anti-gay language that we want to remove. Well, nobody knows the convention delegates better than our organization right now, and it turns out that's become quite relevant to the presidential candidates if it turns that we end up in a contested convention. So I think presidential politics will play very heavily into it. Although, look, in terms of the Supreme Court, it's, as you know, it's very unlikely that the Supreme Court would reverse any of its decisions. So I'm quite confident that marriage is settled in terms of the courts. I mean, the real issue is how it plays out in the states and these state legislatures and securing the freedom that the court has already stated.
We'll probably come back and talk about that a bit later from the audience questions, I would imagine. But Ralph, I wanted to turn to you. I mean, you as mayor of a actually quite progressive city in a very conservative state. How do you manage to push through a lot of pro-LGBT legislation? Can you tell us a bit about how you were able to get that done?
Well, first of all, I was working hard with the whole community. And certainly Utah is as conservative and as Republican a state as any in the country. And as a Democrat and as someone, even when I was running for mayor, I spent time visiting with those who people would think would naturally be opposed. The LDS Church, members of the business community, conservative Republicans who I'd served with in the legislature, to try to sort out the differences, the nuances really, between their views about marriage versus their views around discrimination. And it turns out that with the LDS faith, that there is a very strong strain that favors removing prejudice. They suffered from prejudice in their early years, certainly, and maybe continue to today. But it makes them very sensitive to those issues. And I found in my discussions that there was this...
And that's notwithstanding the fact they were quite slow to endorse sort of non-white
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was something they had to deal with, as they will eventually with gay marriage.
Yeah.
At some point, they're going to just have to face up to the reality there, even though they maintain a position within their faith against it. But anyway, really, it was a matter of bringing people together and listening very carefully and planning and working and building the strong case in the business community, among the faith institutions, among the civic and civil society, around support for not having discrimination and being very clear that that was our goal. And we were able to turn around first our city council, and then as the public discussion enlarged, the public's view on it completely flipped. From one of opposition because of homophobic tendencies or whatever the case may be, to one of, you know something, people should be able to have housing, people should be able to feel protected and safe in their employment. And that, over time, became the dominant discussion versus, you know, should we be protecting gays, which was anathema to some people. And it didn't hurt that we had some legislators, Republican legislators, who were just nasty and bigoted in their comments. And that helped turn the public will as well. And
it's been interesting to see, a number of the pushbacks have been at a very local level. We wrote about Houston, where despite having a lesbian mayor, the city's public voted to reject an equality measure, largely because of concerns related to transgender people using public bathroom facilities, of all things. Which, how do you avoid and deal with those kinds of issues and make sure that you can win over, get a more intelligent public understanding of the issues?
Well, in Salt Lake, actually, I think that's our next step, and something actually we were prepared to start on this last year, but it got caught up in election year politics. But again, I think the same approach.
Specifically, we're getting more transgender-friendly laws through? Or?
Yeah, and I think that's going to happen as people gain a better understanding and better acceptance. And I think the same approach is going to be successful in conservative places like Utah, ultimately, where we spend time with the public and with a lot of time explaining the issue before it is brought forward, having a lot of community dialogue so that the public understanding begins to shift, and what may be a natural reaction in a very conservative place to allow for public accommodation. I think we would have had a decent chance of getting that done. Now, unfortunately, I think the way things are playing out today in Utah, as we're seeing nationally, is much more polarized and partisan and getting more entrenched, and I think it's going to make it more difficult. But I think that's probably going to be the next step in a place like Utah.
I mean, Margaret and Ralph, the business community does have this ability to be the sort of honest broker in the middle that is able to actually advocate and explain, as happened with Indiana. Do you see, are there particular roles and strategies that business should be playing in these local political situations, and any advice you have?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind the business community played a critical role. And it did it both from the point of view of policies that were persistent and normal within the business community. And it also happened because with tourism being a big issue in Utah, our Visitors Bureau for the state took a very strong position through hotels and lodging and restaurants. And then I tend to walk arm in arm with the Chamber of Commerce, and they were right with me on these issues all the way through. So having the business community involved, and we heard that in the first session, I think particularly well, makes an enormous difference in sort of acceptance and putting a different form of pressure, political pressure, whether it's through the ambassadorial role, the embassy role that was described, or the advocacy role. It makes a huge difference. And I think without the business community being firmly in favor and supportive. We, the Apartment Owners Association, for example, supporting our non-discrimination ordinance around housing and employment. And it was because they needed that protection themselves.
And Margaret, I mean, the Salesforce Indiana situation. I mean, what have been the implications and repercussions of that amongst the conservative government?
I'll tell you a story about how critical the business community was in Indiana, because in Indiana, starting in 2012. There was a move, really starting in 2010, there became this movement. Remember, the Tea Party wave gets elected to Congress, but also throughout the country. And there's this movement in Indiana forget the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that became national news within, 6 months ago, but last April, March, almost a year ago. There was a move to, engender a constitutional amendment that would ban marriage between same-sex people. In 2014, that was going to be a ballot initiative. I mean, Indianans were going to have to go to the ballot and vote on whether same-sex marriage should only be between a man and a woman, and that should be enshrined in their state constitution. Remember, this is the same year that the Supreme Court is ruling that same-sex marriage will be legal for Americans across the country. So Indiana was just so far behind, and we had been working on this campaign in Indiana with the business community for 2 cycles in order to derail that bill. And it's when that ballot initiative was derailed that the forces that are on the side of traditionalism in this country came and put on the ballot this religious freedom, or not on the ballot, they signed this Religious Freedom Restoration Act that Governor Pence then signed. Because the business community, Eli Lilly and Cummings, not just Salesforce, Salesforce got Salesforce.com, Angie's List, Eli Lilly and Cummings, the Indy Chamber, because they were already mobilized and active in the fight. They had resourced the fight, they had resourced the campaign, they had they were also lending their lobbyists, they were lending their staff, they were lending their expertise to the campaign. That was already mobilized and on board when Pence signed this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And that's when sort of national attention came to it. That's when sort of the Angie's List CEO came on and said, absolutely not. We will not be able to bring people to the state in a competitive nature. I mean, Eli Lilly has 12,000 employees in Indiana, and they know that they simply won't be competitive. They can't bring young people to the state. Millennials don't want to work for a company that's not going to let their gay friends be protected and have the same benefits and get married in that state. And so the business community made the case to Pence. And frankly, it was because of that pressure that Governor Pence had to step back and fix the law. I mean, remember there was that front page ad of the Indianapolis Star that said, "Fix this now." And it was because of the pressure from the business community that he ended up.
Is it your sense that where things are being lost still, that's because the business community hasn't been doing that? And it was also the perception of the state as being backward, that the businesses weren't going to want to come to the state. It's the optics and the perception that frankly, and the result of that was that the letters LGBT, for the very first time in the history of the state of Indiana, are written in the state statute now, and they weren't before. So Senator Lopez, Colombia is part of this group of maybe 4 or 5 countries in Latin America now that seem to be making very rapid progress on LGBT inclusion, and I think at least certainly Colombia is a very Catholic country. Most of them are. How have you been able to make such rapid progress in Colombia? What are any lessons for the United States and in what you've been able to do?
Thank you so much for the invitation to sharing Colombian experience in this issue. I think I will point out 5 issues that I think allowed us to get to the point we are now. First of all, the country as a whole changed. We are the only country still having a civil war in the entire Western Hemisphere. But even though amidst war, we have been able to push a democratization process in the 80s and 90s. We changed the constitution in 1991. It was previously a 100-year constitution, quite conservative, hierarchical, religious-based. And in 1991, we were able to change the constitution and to open a more progressive agenda and recognition of protection of rights for everybody. That helped us. Second, we create within that constitution not only fundamental rights, fundamental tools to protect those rights, such as the tutela, the constitutional right of protection. By the tutela, any citizen in Colombia, without the representation of a lawyer, can present before a judge to demand the protection of a fundamental right. And that judge have the 10 days to solve the issue, and can issue norms for protection of the right. So the tutela has been key in protecting and actually making the law accountable for the citizens' rights in every topic, including this one. The third thing is, I will say, this is the triangle of power, right? Is the unification of social innovation, civil society organization, using influential opinion makers in society, where they're from, not actually, in the Colombian experience, not actually that much from the business community, but from the artists and culture, intellectuals, academics, journalists, has been a great ally in this battle. And unifying that and creating platforms that have been working hard on this issue, such as Diverse Colombia. Without Diverse Colombia, which is an NGO working since 2003 in promoting a strategic litigation for LGBT rights, for equality, for the inclusion of this agenda, we wouldn't be here in this moment. The fourth thing is using strategic litigation. As you said here in the Human Rights Campaign, this is not rights for LGBT. This is human rights issue, period. This is not a liberal issue. This is an issue of democracy. And we have to hold accountable both society and all the institutions and the government institutions for those rights. We accept as citizens to, concede the monopoly of coercion and taxation to the state because the state promised to keep us protected in our basic rights. And the basic right is that we all will be treated equal, period. So we have to hold accountable the entire system to that basic promise. So this is a human rights issue, is a democratic issue, is not a liberal issue. And using a strategic litigation was key in Colombia because, as you mentioned, Colombia is a very Catholic, religious-based country, to some extent conservative. In the political side, we didn't have pretty much success. We tried, the first 10 years since 1998 that we started this fight, we tried through Congress. In these 18 years, we failed 18 times in Congress, meaning once per year. We literally failed. We tried to promote a law for equal protection, for protection of pension rights or economic rights, we fail once per year. But when we tried through strategic litigation before the Constitutional Court, either through lawsuits or through tutelas, we won 10 cases, 10 huge cases in the last 18 years, meaning we have an achievement every year and a half in court. So it's bypassing politics, right? Bypassing politics and using the institutions that are meant in our state to protect minorities and to protect the constitutional rights of everybody. So I will say that's sort of the recipe so far. So far, so good. And also being, I believe that when you love democracy and when you live in a democracy, you need to actually fall in love with gradual change. Right? This is like Jack the Ripper by parts. Now, if we try to pursue the whole agenda of equality as a package, we wouldn't be here. We acknowledged probably at the very beginning that provoked a huge debate, very hot debate. Because we said, well, we're going to go step by step, right by right. That's the same path that other minorities or even non-minorities but discriminated populations used before. Women's rights use it. To overcome slavery, we use it. We went step by step, right? So we didn't start by adoption or marriage. We start by basic things, just to not consider homosexuality illegal. And then we were building up upon by that. But now I think we have in this moment in which, to some extent, our challenges ahead are, I will say, three main. The first is that you cannot bypass politics forever. At some point, the advancement that you have in the legal and the courts have to match up with the advances that you have in society and culture and politics. So we're now sort of in these processes to leveling this field. That's one challenge ahead. The second is, the other side, we won too much because we were organized. And the side that there are many courageous people in Colombia who have put their lives up to great these achievements. But now the other side, the more conservative side, say, okay, so we're going to learn, and we're going to use also strategic politics, We may not win in the courts, but we might win in Congress, and now they are organizing and getting resources and getting support. A lot of evangelical churches here in America, Christian churches here in America are supporting them politically and financially. So now we're facing this organized sort of political backslash against these achievements. And we have to be prepared and be smart to deal with that challenge.
And we were talking earlier about Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Brazil being in a similar position as Colombia in terms of having made significant strides forward. Similar trends, similar reasons or drivers of change in those countries, or different to each
I think
one?
it's different in the sense there are other countries. Well, I mean, Argentina has been always sort of leading the way in Latin America in this issue, but it has been much more based on political battles, actually, in laws that are approved in Congress. Even countries that have recent success, that are lagging behind Colombia, such as Chile, for example. But Chile recently, started this path of accepted civil union for everybody, including LGBT people, approved in Congress. That's something we're not going to get in the next future in Colombia ever. So I appreciate the fact that in other places, is much more the product of the political process, the political debate that is producing this result, and that might be more sustainable. Rather than other countries such as Mexico or Colombia, we're getting these results through more than strategic litigation rather than supportive politics. So that's what I say, we have to match up these two worlds. And my hope in this, so in the legal sense, as some people mentioned here in the panels before, this is an intergenerational issue. Next generation will be more open and progressive. This will be like ridiculous discussion in 50 years on. I hope. So culture will evolve by generations, and that will happen. That will help. The second thing, at least in Colombia, is to some extent, because the war is the most divisive issue in Colombian society, we have been able to, equality agenda, the equality and the protection of equal rights is an agenda that's less divisive than war. So we have been able to navigate through this. But now we're going to end war, which is great, of course, I hope, this year. But at the same time, that will, other issues such as this one will emerge strongly, both with people who support and both with people who oppose it. So, but it will be at the center of the debate, I think.
I mean, you touched on the well-funded American evangelical churches in particular, and I guess also the Catholic Church, and how that's becoming a force, I think, not just in Latin America, but certainly in Africa. There's a lot of money going in to fight LGBT inclusion. Do you see, how would you like to see others, like the Ford Foundation or international foundations or international businesses, can they play a role to help
Absolutely.
you in
But they have. They have done it so far. Diverse Colombia, which is this NGO, wouldn't survive, wouldn't exist without the support of different international donors such as Ford Foundation and others. So yes, we need support. But I think learning from you and from this great forum, we also need to reach out to the international community and the international organizations to support us, but we have to be able to reach out to our own business community too, in which I will sense that, I will say that we may have some sort of success there. So we need to combine these two to push forward these achievements to be sustained in the political scenario too, not only in the strategic legal scenario.
So before we go to questions from the audience, I wanted to ask each of you about the religious organizations and how they can be engaged, and maybe is there any hope for, rather than purely seeing them as adversaries in this, to actually to help them be part of the change process? Because I think at the moment, certainly in America, a lot of the initiatives to sort of roll back LGBT inclusion and protection is being dressed up in religious freedom terms and so forth. I'll start with you, Margaret. I mean, is there any way in to sort of change how the churches engage with this issue?
There's a lot. I mean, I will tell you that in every single, so first of all, we're fighting to advance freedoms for LGBT people, but we're also fighting these defensive measures, these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, these terrible bills in the state legislatures, but also city ordinances throughout the states. I mean, you referenced Houston, that there was this bill in Houston. There was one in Springfield, Missouri, that we got very involved in, our organization. And in every single one of these southern municipalities where you have a religious argument or religious people sort of making a biblical case against LGBT freedom, you will find Baptist preachers, ministers, evangelical leaders who are coming out and saying, I've prayed to God a lot about this, I've thought about the Bible and what it says, I've talked with my family and my community about it, and this is not part of Christianity to me. And you will find leaders who stand up to sort of what feels like a uniform voice of religion against these issues, who stand up as leaders and push back against it. And there are a lot of them, and there are more and more, and they're organized. I mean, there's a conference of Southern Baptist preachers who are now pro-freedom, LGBT-affirming preachers. And you see, evangelical millennials, 63% of them are in favor of same-sex marriage. I mean, this is a generational issue, and it is moving in one direction, but there are sort of these pockets, these holdouts regionally in the country, but in every single one of those places, you find religious leaders who are standing up against the voices, I think, of the past.
Ralph?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Margaret has described is consistent with what my experience has been in a very conservative state with a very strong doctrinal position around gay marriage. And that is that this is a much more nuanced issue, I think, than you would expect when you meet with religious leaders. Because, again, we spent a lot of time discussing with Mormon leaders in a place like Utah, what is it that you are most concerned about? And when we separated out the marriage issue, which, as was true elsewhere in Utah, we were had the first judge in the United States to legalize gay marriage through federal court action. And what we found on discrimination issues was a completely different tone and discussion. That we could really talk to our LDS friends about the need to be respectful of their religious principles and yet recognize rights and provide protections for everyone. And when we were able to make that distinction in the way we both presented and discussed these issues, we not only prevailed in Salt Lake City with the support of the LDS Church ultimately, but also increasingly across the state and local government jurisdictions, and then statewide last year. And it was the conversation, it was the understanding of the differences between a fine doctrinal point and issues around discrimination.
And Claudia, I mean, the current Pope has made it more nuanced, at least from a Catholic position. Is that showing up in any of the conversations you're having in Colombia?
Not so far. I mean, a little bit, but it's not really influential. They choose what to listen to from the Pope, from the Francis Pope. But I think at the same time, I want to share this because I think it's an anecdote that is interesting in this religious debate with this issue. So, of course, nobody, or a little bit less people in Colombia dare to say that they are defending discrimination in the debate. Now, they're not there to say that. So they are starting using the argument when we get closer to the marriage debate and adoption debate. No, we're not against discrimination. We're not discriminating people. We respect everybody. We love everybody. We want to protect children and family. That's their argument. And what was nice of that is that the Constitutional Court sort of gave them the reason and said, yes, by the Colombian Constitution, the children's rights prevails over anybody else's rights. And one of the rights of the children is to have a family, regardless of the sexual orientation of the family. So we're going to protect the right of the children to have a family, and that's why you can have adoption. In fact, as to the best of my knowledge, we are the only country now that get first adoption than marriage, which is a little bit crazy. But we got it. And we got it because they push forward this argument. We're not discriminating anybody. We are protecting children. And the Constitutional Court in Colombia said, you're right, we're going to protect the children, so we're going to allow adoption regardless of the sexual orientation of the family. So now they come to the second argument, which is the family. And so the Constitutional Court is asking, okay, yes, family is protected, by the Constitution in Colombia. The point is, which kind of family are you talking about? Because you're talking about as if the Bible family is the family in Colombia, which is not, according to official, research and polls or whatever. We have more than 25 different kinds of families in Colombia. So what the Constitutional Court is saying now is, guess what? All 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 kind of families that can exist in Colombia will have equal protection. So they are not being able to pursue their case in legal terms. They will try to pursue it, and they are trying hard to pursue it in the more open debate and the political scenario.
Great. Well, let's have some questions from the audience. Who would like to kick us off right in the middle there? Do say who you are.
Hi, this is a question for Senator Lopez.
You just say who you are.
And I'm Javier Barrientos with Biogen. So two questions. Earlier today, we heard about this notion of expanding LGBT rights around the world and the cautions around cultural imperialism. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as you engage, with partners outside Colombia. And the other one is flip side of that. Have you thought about the Colombian diaspora, and have you engaged with them? And is Diverse Colombia working with them at all?
Yeah, please.
Well, as working with the diaspora, I think that's something we have to explore and use more. I don't think we haven't get as much network globally as we can, and we need to reach out both to the Colombian diaspora and to many other people, such as people in this room, that can help us a lot in this fight. And about imperialism, well, if democracy is imperialism, if human rights is imperialism, let's welcome imperialism. I mean, we need to use every tool in every single part of the world to protect human rights, basic human rights. And the fact is, we live in a world in which half of the countries that sit in the United Nations have no sense of democracy and human rights protection whatsoever. So it's a hard work to do, but we need to do it. And I think we shouldn't be stopped for such kind of prejudice, I think.
At the back there.
Good morning, Jonathan Lovitz with the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. Senator Lopez, earlier today, Randy Barry was talking about chambers of commerce globally and how they can affect local change at that intersection of politics and business. The NGLCC affiliate in Colombia is one of the strongest in the world, and I'm curious what you can tell us about how the local change supporting LGBT small businesses as parts of supply chains in your region, and how that attracts multinational corporations who also help then further develop more new LGBT-owned businesses in the region, is helping create a stronger economy that flows across borders and across some of the political and religious divides that have torn apart the region in some places.
Well, to be honest with you, I think that's something we need to explore more. I mean, I'm sure that we have a lot more support in the business community than the one has been expressed openly so far. So I will say the Chamber of Commerce, the American Chamber of Commerce in Bogota, or the LGBT Chamber of Commerce in Bogota, they are trying to, make this case and bring people out. And I know, for example, for 2016 LGBT parade, national parade, we will invite, and we're working on inviting different companies, both national and multinational companies set up in Colombia, to bring and to be with us in this national parade and to make our case with us. But I don't think this is so far an issue that is key in the political debate or in the results that we have had. So that's clearly a new camp of action that we need to work with.
Margaret, and in particular, one of the themes that comes up time and time again in America is, you can now get married as an LGBT person, but you can be fired in half the country for being gay and thrown out of your home and so forth. Do you see any prospect of that changing with a Republican Congress?
You might be, this may surprise you. But one of the things that our organization does is we lobby on the Hill. And one of the things we've seen in the last 2 years is because there have been test votes that come up that are, as votes come up and people have an opportunity to go on the record to say, to take a vote that is in favor of LGBT freedom, if it's on, Social Security benefits for military spouses or some kind of recognition of LGBT rights, 18 U.S. senators on the Republican side have taken pro-freedom votes, and more than 70 members of the House of Representatives on the Republican side have taken pro-LGBT votes. And what we're trying to do is demonstrate that there is a critical mass of votes on the Republican side that, paired with Democratic votes, would support a federal legislation for comprehensive non-discrimination. And ultimately, comprehensive non-discrimination, which is the end game here in the United States for LGBT people in terms of full political freedom, that won't happen unless the Republican House of Representatives is willing to move the bill. It has to come through leadership, right? So Speaker Ryan, and they have to be willing to move a bill. And it's not. I don't think it's a pipe dream to hope that could happen. He is more amenable to it than Speaker Boehner was. I think it would take a really. There was a hope, I think, before the presidential election got so crazy that maybe in a lame duck session of this next Congress, that might be able to move through as a rider to a defense authorization bill or some other bill. So no, I don't think it's impossible at all. In fact, our job is to figure out how to make it happen very, very quickly. Because otherwise, if this doesn't happen proactively through Republicans, it will be like the employment non-discrimination bill, which frankly languished in the Senate for 10 years. Until 2013 came, and 10 senators on the Republican side decided to join it, and it was passed. Now, ENDA's sort of passé. That's yesterday. We want comprehensive non-discrimination now. But there are avenues, there are openings, and that's what we're doggedly pursuing.
I also wanted to come back to you on your, to my mind, surprising optimism about the court and the Supreme Court and the fact it won't reverse its decisions. Because it does seem to me, if a Republican president emerges after the next election, the president will have control of both houses of Congress, and not only will Scalia's seat be up, but there's quite a high probability that another liberally held seat might become available in the next 4 years. What reason do you have for thinking they wouldn't make this a litmus test of any appointments?
Republicans have a long history of making litmus tests about abortion, but not so much on LGBT issues. But
they haven't had to deal with marriage equality before.
Yeah, but it also doesn't track public opinion. But public opinion on abortion has been roughly the same for 40 years, and it is, as we all know, in the last 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, just the trend lines are in the completely opposite direction. You hear rhetoric on the campaign trail where people say, "Oh yes, I'm going to appoint Supreme Court justices that are going to overturn the Obergefell decision." That is madness. That is not tethered to any form of reality. And we are, in some cases, in quiet, behind-the-scenes, closed briefing rooms with these candidates. No, but in my experience, this even politically isn't a unifying issue on the right. This is not something that mobilizes Christian conservatives to the polls. We saw that in 2004 in the presidential race. It simply didn't make a difference in the presidential race. It certainly isn't going to in 2016.
We're almost out of time. Is there time for one more question from the audience? Gentleman right at the front here. Mike's coming to you now.
Hi, my name is Lazar McAllister. I'm with Accenture. It seems that in the past, LGBT and issues related to LGBT have been weaponized in any kind of political race or anytime there's something else going on that may originally not have had anything to do with LGBT. Have you seen that in other parts of the world where, I know we kind of had it here and you just kind of spoke about it. It seems that intersectionality comes into play and how you frame the issue and saying, oh, well, this will not only affect you, but it'll affect other people, whether it's LGBT rights, it's still going to be a part of your family or in your religion, things like that. Does intersectionality help the cause or does it hurt the cause in terms of moving LGBT rights forward? Can you tie it to other issues or is it better to leave it separate and kind of push it through?
My own experience and observation is we need to talk about the intersection of everybody's rights. And most people can relate one way or another to different rights that have been offended in their own lives or close to them. And with that as well, we need a civil dialogue. That has not been happening in this presidential campaign, certainly on the Republican side. And it scares me, as I know it scares so many people, that if what we see and have been seeing is what plays out in ultimately a president, if it's a Republican president, will reverse much of what has been accomplished. And that scares me because when we can have good discussion, we saw this in Salt Lake City and in Utah, the mood and the tenor of the discussion also changes the results.
Margaret?
Reverse so much of, I mean, one of the things, if a Republican gets into office, I mean, one of the main things that sort of our organization will be working on, and many Republicans who are pro-freedom Republicans will be working on, is to make sure that no president undoes the executive orders that this president has done that apply to LGBT people. But aside from that, which is a real issue and contested, I don't see, you know, a Republican getting into office and sort of undoing all of the progress that has been done, because it's happened legislatively, it's happened through the courts, and these things aren't easy things to undo. I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson was undone, right? The Brown versus Board of Education. But I mean, that was a very big decision. That's not LGBT freedom. I mean, that's not going to happen at the court level. So I think there's a bit of fear mongering that happens. While on one hand we do have to be aware and alert, and the executive orders are a real thing. We need to make sure that Obama's executive orders on LGBT freedom are not rolled back by a Republican president. Aside from that, I don't see LGBT people losing their freedom under a Republican president. I think that's unrealistic.
The last word to you, Claudia.
Well, I will say that in general, I think my feeling is that both in Colombia and Latin America, the fact that the LGBT rights issue is an issue across borders, across sectors, across political parties, has been a huge advantage. And yes, as you said, it could be weaponized by one side or the other sometimes, but I don't think there's, different from the United States, we don't have two parties, we have at least 12 parties. And we have allies and people against in the 12. And yes, some parties are more in favor and some others not, but in general, I think that has been an advantage. And I would like to finish by saying that this issue and what we have been able, even though it has been a strategic litigation and norms and reasons and arguments, this is a very emotional issue too. When you convince people to say, look, just look around. Just look around. We are just as human beings as you are. We're just as citizens as you are. We are just as couple as you are. We are just as family as you are. Just look around. Stop thinking with your prejudice for a moment. Just look around and feel and live. And I think that sense of empathy has helped a lot, and that's all across the board in different sectors.
Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. A fantastic note to end on. I'm going to invite two of my colleagues from the EIU up on stage now to talk about some new research that we've done as a company for this event around attitudes to LGBT issues amongst executives. And as we do so, I'd like to thank this panel for extremely stimulating conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.